The boy was poor until he became the only one who saved the millionaire's daughter. Don't forget that you can always write your life story in the comments, and maybe I'll create a video about it. Sometimes the truth comes from somewhere other than where you expect it. Eduard Melon is a billionaire, a man who seems to have it all, but within weeks, his life turns into a nightmare. His only daughter dies, and none of the best doctors in the country can explain why. Everything changes when a strange boy appears on the doorstep, claiming to know the reason. But the further Eduard follows the trail, the more terrifying the truth becomes, and the closer he gets to destroying the world he built. Eduard Melon woke up at 5 in the morning, as usual. His phone was lying on the nightstand next to him, the screen blank. Not a single notification. No letters from the board of directors, no news from the market, and not a single call from the hospital. He stood up, went to the bathroom, turned on the cold water. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. Too long. Nothing had changed. The same perfectly ironed robe, the same impeccable haircut, only his gaze, as if it no longer belonged to him. Over the past month, he had learned to fear silence, because every next sound could be the last. Isabella, his daughter, 10 years old, the only one. She was admitted to hospital 4 weeks ago. Fever, weakness, a sharp deterioration in her condition. 2 days later, the intensive care unit. 5 days later, the doctors were panicking. Hundreds of tests, scans, biopsies, genetics, toxicology, all to no avail. No diagnosis, no plan, no explanation. Autoimmune? Viral? A rare syndrome, perhaps? Repeated experts from Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and Boston. Each spoke cautiously. None took responsibility. Eduard hired the best. He could afford everything. But nothing worked. His wife, Claire, lived in the room. She barely spoke to him. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, as if he were guilty. Maybe she was right. That day, he arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. His driver, Tom, silently opened the door. Eduard didn't say a word, didn't even look at him. He didn't remember the drive. Just walking into the room and seeing a nurse changing the IV. Isabella was asleep. Her face was pale, her lips dry. There were needle marks on her arm. He sat down on a chair. He looked. For a long time, the same thing kept pounding in his head. I can't save her. In the evening, when he went down to the underground parking to get some fresh air, a boy approached him. "Mr. Melon?" he asked. Eduard didn't even immediately understand that he was being addressed. "Yes?" The boy looked about 13 or 14 years old. Skinny, with a black baseball cap and a backpack, he stood confidently, as if he wasn't afraid. "Your daughter has an allergic reaction, a serious one. But it's not a food allergy. She was poisoned." Eduard chuckled. "Who are you? Where are your parents?" "I'm Gabriel. I live nearby. I know this sounds weird, but I'm not kidding. Your daughter was given a drug that was already being taken off the trials. I know who to look for it." Eduard was silent. He didn't know what to say. The boy continued. "It wasn't in the drugstore. It wasn't official. It was a test run. I heard the conversation. It was at your company, Research Corps, 2 weeks ago. I'm often there, nearby in the garage. Sometimes I work part-time. You think I'm a kid from the street and don't understand anything. But I heard everything." Eduard frowned. He knew Research Corps. It was a subsidiary, an R&D platform that had recently been acquired. They were developing experimental immunomodulators. One of their areas of focus was pediatric oncology and autoimmune disorders. Enough, he said hoarsely. This is not funny. I have the packaging, Gabriel said. I can show you. He pulled a box with a crumpled label out of his backpack. It had a batch number, a subsidiary company logo, and the words, "For clinical use only." Eduard took the box. He looked. It was indeed their brand, but the drug was unregistered. It couldn't be on the market. Who gave this to you? One guy. He was wearing a lab coat, was in the lab. I heard him say that the new batch will soon be tested on patients with access through private clinics. Eduard remained silent. I know you won't believe me, Gabriel said, but if you check it out, I'm sure you'll find that's what caused it all. The boy turned around and walked away, leaving the box in Eduard's hands. That night, Eduard did not sleep. He sat in his office, looking through reports on purchases, serial numbers, partner clinics. The search engine on the corporate server gave an error when entering the code from the box, as if such a drug did not exist. But it was their product. He called his internal auditor. I need you to check batch number ZC8473. It's not in the database. I know. Check shipments for the last 3 months, especially through channels outside the US. And don't tell anyone. Understood. The next morning, Isabella's condition worsened. Her blood pressure dropped. Her pulse became unstable. The doctors spoke quietly, with their eyes downcast. Eduard stood by the window of the ward. His hands were in his pockets. He no longer felt fear or anger, only emptiness. If he's right, he thought of Gabriel, and I didn't even know it. Who am I then? He felt everything cracking. Confidence, power, logic, everything his life was built on no longer worked. Somewhere deep down, a thought was brewing. What if the boy really was telling the truth? And if so, what was he willing to do to prove it? The next morning, Eduard arrived at the office not through the main entrance, but through the back entrance for staff. He did not warn security, did not call the secretary. His face, which had graced the covers of business magazines for decades, seemed unrecognizable even to the employees themselves. For the first time in many years, he walked not as a manager, but as a person who urgently needed to know what was going on under his nose. Research Core was on the 6th floor, not the most luxurious, but highly secure. Biometric scanners, login logs, dual authentication. He used his personal access and immediately noticed that the system was missing recent updates about test batches. Where are the experimental protocol records for March? He asked Laura, the technical coordinator, the only one on site. Only through a special channel, she replied. According to protocol, access is limited to the project manager. I'm the boss, Eduard said coldly. Open access. Now. For the next 2 hours, he read the documentation. Internal mail chains, reagent purchases, shipment movements. Sure enough, the ZC8473 shipment was listed as consumed during lab testing. But there had been a shipment. Closed. Unaccounted for. Through a third-party clinic in the suburbs. His heart began to pound. The name of the clinic sounded familiar. It was one of the ones he had taken Isabella to 3 weeks ago, when her symptoms were just beginning. There, they had given her an IV of general strengthening therapy. It had seemed like a routine procedure. He went downstairs, left the building, and got into the car. To Stanview Clinic, he said to the driver. Right now? Immediately. They didn't recognize him at first in the reception area. The nurse adjusted his glasses and said he needed to make an appointment. He showed his ID, introduced himself, and said he was conducting a private investigation. 20 minutes later, he was already talking to the head of the department. "We don't conduct clinical trials without permission," she said sharply. "And who of yours gave the child an IV under the guise of vitamins?" he asked. "We don't know what exactly was in the solution. It was a standard drug from one of our partners. We have a contract with Research Corps." "Show me the contract." She paused. "This could be a breach of confidentiality." "The girl is in a coma," said Eduard. "She's my daughter." He didn't have time to finish the conversation before he received a message. "Mr. Melon, we can meet tonight, near the tunnel under the old 14th Street Bridge. Gabriel." He didn't know how the boy had gotten his number, and he knew that meeting in such places wasn't the smartest idea. But he went. Gabriel was waiting on the concrete slab, leaning against the railing. He had a file in his hands, with photographs, some notes, and a dictaphone recording. "This is a conversation between Jeremy Glass and a technician named Thomas Wu," he said. "Jeremy is a manager at Research Corps. They were discussing an accelerated launch of a test formula because the lead drug was taking too long to get approved, and they had a contract for fast deliveries. They decided to speed up the cycle through private channels, including this clinic." He paused. "I heard it myself. Then I found a tape recorder on the technician. He left it in a locker. He quit that same day and disappeared." Eduard put in his headphones. The voices were unclear but discernible. "If we wait for the committee, they'll pass us by. We'll just send them as nutritional support. They don't even have an analysis." "Are you sure this won't cause side effects?" "It will. Maybe. But if we don't act now, we'll lose 2 years of investment." Eduard took off his headphones. "Why are you doing this?" The boy shrugged. "Because I once had a sister, too. She was treated in a cheap clinic. They gave her medicine until it got worse. No one answered. She died. I was 8. I remembered the name of the company. Then I couldn't do anything, but now I can." Eduard felt his throat tighten. It was hard to accept. What did this boy know about loss, about suffering, about what it meant to fight? Everything. He knew everything. "Where do you live?" he asked quietly. "Here and there. Sometimes in a shelter, sometimes on the street, sometimes in a friend's trailer." "And school?" "I don't go. There's no point. They don't talk to people like me there." Eduard looked at him. Not a child. A soldier. Late that evening, he handed the file to his trusted lawyer. He looked at it and said only one thing. "If this is true, your company is in for a federal scandal." "It's true," said Eduard. The next morning, he returned to the hospital. The doctor reported that Isabella had a liver problem. Urgent intervention was needed. Perhaps an antidote. But for that, they needed to know exactly what was in the drug. Eduard left the room, took out his phone and dialed a number. "Find Thomas Wu for me. Now." He disappeared. "Look deeper." He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he understood. The truth hurts more than a lie, but it gives a chance to survive. And he still had a chance. Thanks to a boy from the street who no one listened to. Detective Barton looked annoyed as he walked into Eduard's office at his private residence. "Mr. Melon, who did you contact?" He began without preamble. "I looked at the file you sent. If it's not a forgery, you have a federal case on your hands. But you must understand, if you go to the police or the press with this, you will strike not only at yourself, but at the entire structure. There will be checks, Arrests, searches. That suits me, Edward said briefly. You? Barton chuckled. Are you okay with that? My daughter was almost killed by a drug produced by my own company. If after that you think I care about the market, shares, or reputation, you don't understand who you're talking to. Barton paused. Then listen. One of the defendants, Jeremy Glass, has been under surveillance for a long time. There are suspicions that he works with private funds that use pharmaceutical developments for gray schemes. We couldn't catch him red-handed, but if you give me the documents, the recording, and the packaging with the drug, I'll raise the case, without publicity, until we find confirmation. Take it, said Edward, handing over everything he had. And one more thing. Find a boy named Gabriel. He is the key to this story. Where is he? Edward froze. He hasn't been in touch since last night. The next day, he received a call from the coordinator of a shelter in the south of the city where Gabriel sometimes visited. We haven't seen him for 2 days. He always showed up once a day, at least to eat, to take something. Now, silence. And none of the street people know where he went. Edward felt his insides tighten. It was more than worry, it was fear, deep, heavy, adult. He drove to the shelter himself. He talked to the children, the volunteers, even the security. No one saw Gabriel. Only one boy with a tattoo on his wrist said, "Someone called him in the parking lot the day before yesterday. A black Jeep. No license plates." He got in, and that was it. Edward realized that there was no more time. Meanwhile, Barton continued working. He obtained a warrant to seize documents from the Research Corps lab. It turned out that Thomas Wu, the technician who had been developing the drug, had disappeared 3 weeks before the incident with Isabella. His apartment was empty, his phone was turned off, and his bank transactions were frozen. However, through a third party, Edward managed to get in touch with his girlfriend, a nurse from New Jersey. At first, she was silent, but then, seeing his condition, she said, "Thomas said he was forced to participate in the transfer of raw drugs. He was furious, said he was leaving and would hand everything over to the police. 2 days later, he disappeared. I'm sure he was either eliminated or intimidated." Eduard silently recorded her testimony on a dictaphone. While he was following the tracks, something else began in his office. A board meeting. "Eduard, you are undermining the stability of the company," one of them said. "They are already preparing a lawsuit against you. You accused your own division of falsification without sufficient evidence. The shares fell by 17%. The media has already sensed something." "I'll make an official statement," he said. "Are you crazy? If you speak out now, you'll sink the entire holding. I'm saving my daughter, and possibly hundreds of others. You'll lose everything. So be it." That same evening, Barton called him. "We found him." "Whom?" "Gabriel. In an old warehouse in the west of the city. He was tied to a radiator, without food for 2 days. Apparently they wanted to scare him, but he's alive." "Is he okay?" "Weakened, but yes." "And do you know what the first thing he said when we freed him was?" "What?" "Tell Mr. Melon that I did not betray." Eduard arrived at the station at night. He was taken to a room where Gabriel was lying under a blanket, drinking water from a plastic bottle. "You came." The boy smiled tiredly. "Of course. Sorry I didn't save you. They thought I would break. But I remembered everything, and I understood something else. They have another channel, through Mexico. There they conduct what they do not conduct here. They called it a clean zone. Do you have evidence?" Not yet. But if you want, I'll show you how to find them. Eduard looked at him. He had no family, no home, but he had a will. The one that even strong adults lose. 2 days later, Eduard spoke at a press conference. He confirmed the leak. He handed over the documents to journalists. He blamed Research Corps' management and suspended the division's activities. The board of directors removed him from his post the next day, but he already knew that there was no way back. There was hope in Isabella's room. One of the drugs suggested by an independent toxicologist had worked. The girl opened her eyes for the first time in a week. "Daddy?" she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "I'm here." The system had cracked. 3 top managers had been arrested. Jeremy Glass had fled. An international warrant was already pending. Barton had confirmed that a full federal investigation was underway, and Eduard himself was assembling a team. He had a goal: to see this case through to the end. He was no longer the same. And it all started with a boy who no one wanted to listen to. The press conference took place in the morning. The room was crowded, cameras, microphones, flashes. Eduard stood in a formal dark blue suit without a tie. He looked tired, but collected. In front of him was a folder with materials. Behind him were not PR people, not lawyers, but 2 investigators and Detective Barton. "My name is Eduard Melon. I am the founder and former CEO of Melon Biotech. Today, I speak not as a businessman, but as a father." He paused. "For the past few weeks, my 10-year-old daughter has been between life and death. She was poisoned with a drug created as part of one of our internal projects. This drug was brought to market in violation of all ethical, medical, and legal norms. I am responsible for what happened. But now I intend to ensure that those who kept silent about the truth also answer." He handed the documents to one of the journalists. "I am providing you with copies of internal correspondence, audit reports, and eyewitness accounts confirming that illegal shipments of experimental formulas were taking place within Research Corps." One of the reporters raised his hand. "You've already been suspended. Is this revenge?" "This is justice," Eduard replied. The next morning, the Federal Commission began searching Research Corps' offices. 7 employees were arrested at once, including 2 logistics engineers and one of the deputy directors of clinical programs. The documents provided by Eduard turned out to be only part of it. Gabriel, despite his age, helped investigators reconstruct the supply chain. He remembered codes, routes, names. His memory was amazing. "Are you sure you want to be in this?" Barton asked. "I'm already in it," he replied. But at this point, Isabella's situation worsened. Her liver began to fail, and there was a risk of blood poisoning. The doctors were ready to fight to the end, but they needed to know exactly what substance they were dealing with. The only hope was the original formula of batch ZC8473. "We've determined that the version given to the girl was deviating from the basic protocol," said a CDC lab analyst. "The problem is that the standard antidote is not working. We need the original sample." "Where is he?" asked Eduard. The answer was simple. Everything was destroyed. The lab had no right to store test samples without registration, but Barton had a new lead. There might be a sample in Mexico, in the so-called clean zone, where Research Corps' partners were conducting unofficial tests. The problem? It would be hard to get a warrant there quickly. It was international territory. "We can't wait," Eduard said. Through private channels and connections, Eduard found a former employee of one of the partner funds. He, for a substantial reward, agreed to help. On the 5th day, they had an exact list of substances from the batch. It was passed on to the doctors. 16 hours after the corrective drug was administered, Isabella's indicators stabilized. That same evening, Edward sat on the steps of the hospital. Gabriel was next to him. They ate ice cream from plastic cups. No one spoke. "You didn't have to do all this," Edward finally said. "I could," Gabriel shrugged. "But then she would have died." Edward was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You're not just a kid from the street. You're not just a billionaire." He chuckled. "We both lost our way." When investigators arrived at Melon Biotech headquarters, some of the management had already fled. Jeremy Glass left the country the day before the press conference, but the federal warrant worked. He was found in Panama 2 days later. Barton reported, "He will be extradited. We have a full package of evidence. There will be questions for you too, Ed, but you went against the system, and this will be taken into account. Perhaps a suspended sentence, perhaps fines, but you will not disappear." Edward nodded. "I have nothing more to lose." "And the girl?" He looked out the window. Isabella was sleeping, holding a soft toy in her arms. "She is not everything," he said. "Now she is the beginning." A week after Isabella's stabilization, Eduard officially announced the launch of a new project, the Fund for Control and Transparency in Pharmacology. Its goal is an independent audit of all clinical trials conducted in the United States. The support program was personally financed by Melon. The second project was City Without a Shadow, a program for teenagers from vulnerable areas, where Gabriel became a symbol of resistance. The boy was asked to speak at a closed UN event on children's rights. He stood on stage in a regular sweatshirt, holding a piece of paper, but not reading. "Sometimes adults forget what it's like to be the one who isn't heard. I just wanted someone to listen. Mr. Melon, he didn't believe me at first, but then he understood, and it saved a life." He fell silent and added, "I think that's what good is. When someone who has power uses it not to hide, but to protect." Isabella was returning home a month later. She smiled when she saw who was waiting for her at the car. Edward, Claire, and Gabriel in a new jacket, smiling a little awkwardly. "Are you with us now?" she asked. "If you don't kick me out," he shrugged. "Then let's go home." They got into the car. No security, no big words, just family. 2 months after the revelation, Eduard stood at the microphone again. This time, in a Columbia University auditorium. But this time, he wasn't talking about profits or presenting strategies. He was opening a course on ethics in biomedical research, courses that he had personally founded. Behind him, the symbol of the foundation created in Isabella's honor. "I was sure I knew how the world worked," he said. "Money, power, numbers, everything seemed manageable. But one mistake in the chain, and you lose the main thing." He paused. "And when you lose, it doesn't matter how many investors or shares you have. What matters is whether there is someone nearby who still believes in you, or at least that you are capable of changing." He did not name the boy, but everyone who followed the case knew who he was talking about. At the trial of Research Corps' management, the prosecutor said, "This wasn't just a glitch. This was a deliberate misrepresentation of data, carried out in order to speed up the drug's entry into the market, in defiance of the law. It cost the lives of at least 2 patients, and it could have cost the lives of many more." Eduard's testimony played a key role. He admitted his responsibility. He was not jailed, but was ordered to pay a large compensation fund, and most importantly, He no longer had the right to hold positions in the pharmaceutical business. But he didn't intend to. Isabella slowly recovered. She began to walk around the house, play with the dog, and return to online school. The doctor said that the girl survived in defiance of all medical laws. Her body recovered faster than expected. "She's like you," Claire said. "Strong? No. Stubborn." The warmth between them returned, cautious but real. Gabriel lived with them. At first it was an experiment. He didn't fit right in. He slept fully dressed and kept a knife by his bed. He didn't trust them, but over time he began to get used to it. His room was simple, but there was a poster of space in it and an old laptop on which he wrote something at night. "What are you doing?" Edward asked one day. "A story about one girl and one guy who ruined everything, but then helped. Happy ending? I don't know yet, but they're both trying." One day, the three of them went to the park. Gabriel bought ice cream himself, without waiting for Edward. Isabella took his hand. "Are you my brother now?" He shrugged. "I guess." "Good. Because sometimes Dad can be boring." "Yes, I noticed." Edward laughed. "Really?" For the first time in a long time, by late spring, the city without a shadow foundation had opened its first center in the Bronx. It had a computer lab, legal support, psychologists. Gabriel became its spokesman. He still didn't like the attention, but one day he said, "If even one person like me feels that he has been heard, it will not have been in vain." That evening, the three of them sat at dinner. On the table was plain pasta, water with lemon, no waiter. Gabriel read the news on his phone. Isabella told him how she almost fell asleep in math. Edward simply listened. "Hey," he said, "I was thinking, maybe we could go somewhere this summer." "Where?" his daughter asked. "I don't know. The coast? Or the mountains? How about an amusement park?" "Even that. No costume, Dad, okay?" "Okay." He smiled. Gabriel looked up. "And without security, too?" "Without security." And for a second there was silence. The one that no longer frightened. The one that meant they were home. The newspapers called Gabriel the boy who changed the billionaire. But he himself knew it was not about money. It was about the fact that even the strongest person needs another person to become real. And Eduard understood that the point is not in saving the world, but in not betraying yourself every day, and being there when it matters. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it starts with trust, with honesty, with ice cream on the steps, and with one simple "I believe you."